Actually, we're going to go ahead and start this a minute early. And boom. Okay. All right, guys. Well, we're live on Facebook on our private feed. So just stand by. We'll wait till noon. We'll jump in and get going. And let's what, we got 5 of us. Test this chat. Okay, it's 12 o'clock. So good afternoon, gang. For those of you that are on time, and it looks like mostly some familiar names here, so you've probably heard me say this more than once. I start my stuff on time. So, if I'm late, that's not good. So we're going to start at 12 o'clock every single Thursday. We will stick to a 90-minute limit. I kind of have some ideas of where I think I'm going to stop on each particular Thursday. I know for a fact that that's not necessarily going to hold true every Thursday. Sometimes I might go a little faster. Other times you guys might have questions, but we will generally be stopping at 1:30 every Thursday. It would be highly unlikely we go over more than 2 or 3 minutes. So just so you can plan your day. And then it's possible if I think, hey, we've done pretty well, we might stop a few minutes early, but I would plan from 12 to 1:30 pretty much every Thursday from this point forward. I was telling Misty, she got in a little bit earlier. I'm pretty happy with the way we're presenting this, but we really want some feedback from you guys. So I think we've made some improvements from the way I was doing the presentation for Norm a couple of months back. At least I think they were better. I want you guys to affirm that or tell me, no, Lance, this is confusing or whatever it happens to be, so I can do a better job presenting this and make some changes as we go. So a couple of things for now. Let's keep this loose. I don't know whether we're going to have, 7 or 8 people or 22 people. So at this point, I'm not overly concerned with a large audience, meaning if you want to interrupt or just unmute yourself, just jump on in, unmute, have a question. Or if I've already passed something and you say, hey, Lance, could you go back to the next page and take another look? Let's just keep this as loose as we possibly can. If I think the question, not that there's a stupid question, because there's not, but if I think the question is something that I'm going to get to later or something I don't want to dive in too much, I'll just tell you that. So okay, let's put that one on hold and we'll deal with that later, or maybe one-on-one. But more than likely, I'll be able to go back and get it addressed. So a couple of things just to get started. Today, I used the text system to get you guys these links. There's basically 3 links that you're going to need to get into this contract call. The Zoom link, which is this one. It is possible that I'm going to change the Zoom link next week. And instead of doing it as a normal Zoom, I might do it as a Zoom webinar. So just know that that link might change. So next week when I'll send out the text, make sure you're using the fresh link, and that's going to be true every single week. So there's the Zoom link. There's going to be a link to the actual presentation, which is the Canva that you're looking at right now. That is a view only Canva. It is a live up to the minute edited version of Canva. So I will make changes on this thing tonight, tomorrow, next Wednesday, next Thursday. If you are clicking into that Canva presentation, you will see the changes as we go. So that link will not change. Just if you want to hang on to that one, it'll be there. You can look at the presentation as we go. And then we have a third link, which is on the link tree, which is the same as this link I have here on this presentation, which is basically PDFs of what we're doing. Right now, it's, how many pages is this thing? 15 pages long. What we'll do with this I have a feeling some of you might want to print this out, maybe have it next to you as we're going through the program and say, hey, I'm going to see the entire full page, maybe scribble a couple notes or not. So this is all that you're going to see in this particular portion is PDFs of the forms that we're going to be covering, and these are going to be in order that we will be covering them. So this link also will be updated in real time, meaning that right now there's only 15 pages on there. Well, next week we're going to review another, so many pages. So that'll go from 15 pages to 25 pages. And then when we're done, goodness gracious, Norm's Contract College booklet, when it was done, I don't know, Misty, if you remember, I'm thinking it's 400 pages long. I think, I'm not sure if anybody was on previous Contract College or not, but it was multiple hundreds of pages. So this PDF link will certainly grow to many, many, many pages, as will this Canva presentation. So for now, we're going to stick with part one, and we'll talk about where we go from there. So let's keep it kind of loose and open. And let me do one other thing, and we're going to get going. We got 19 people. That's good. I'm kind of surprised in a good way. I'm happy with that. We will open this up to Ivar and Sevar maybe next week or the following week. So for now, it's just Coldwell Banker Town and Country. Moving into the future, we'll open it up and see if we can get 50, 60, 100 people on this class and get something going here. So before I start, anybody have any questions? And I can't see if you're unmuted. So if you're just super, super polite, you just don't want to jump in, I will be monitoring anybody who unmutes themselves. I don't see anybody unmuted, so I'm going to move on. Same thing with chat. I can see chat, whatever problem I was having previously, I fixed. So go ahead and feel free to use the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's get going. So one thing that we're going to start doing on all of our contract colleges, and not only with contract college, but our plan is to do this with a lot of the stuff that we're delivering in 2023, is we're going to start surveying you guys. Okay. So right now, I know we have an email version that works well. I think there's also be a text version, but our intention is to send you a very quick survey. At some point, it's not going to be 2 minutes after the class is over, but it'll be certainly by the end of the day. And it'll basically say, hey, what'd you think of today's contract college? Please be honest, guys. I know I've heard, Lance, no one's going to tell you you did a horrible job. Tell me I did a horrible job. Tell me you didn't understand this. You'd like to deliver. The only way we can get better is if you guys are honest. So just, tell us what you need, what you want. And by the way, don't feel bad to do that in real time. If I'm confusing you or moving too fast or too slow, you can sit back and say, hey, stop. I don't understand that. You've confused me. But you will get a survey after every single class. And again, since we're all Coldwell Banker Town and Country now, you'll also going to start getting surveys for other things. How was today's sales meeting? How was this? How was that? So this is something that we're doing in 2023. I thought I'd kind of pay a little bit of homage to Norm. I was going through Norm's materials because this Contract College truly was his baby. And for those of you that went through Norm's class, he had a couple of PDFs with some things that he had put in there. I've eliminated most of that only because I wanted to clean it up a little bit. I don't want to deliver PDF copies to you guys that have been copied over 15 times and it's very difficult to see. So if for those of you that have been into Norm's Contract College before and said he had a couple of cool graphics, I also think he has a couple of cool graphics. I just need to get those graphics cleaned up into this presentation. But one of the things I saw I think it was on page one of his page one, volume one. And I couldn't agree with this quote more from Norm, more than ever, it's important to have on-the-spot answers to clients' questions. If you're new in this business, this is probably one of your biggest challenges, is just that fear and intimidation of you're going to get asked a question. You're not going to know the answer. You're either going to just freeze up on that or just get embarrassed or whatever it happens to be. Totally understand that, guys. Been there, done that. So this is one reason that we're going to continue to do this Contract College over and over and over. And I'm kind of pleased to see some of our folks in attendance are not our brand new agents who have never sold a house, but we've got some people in here that have been with the company a long time. And that makes me very happy because we all have something to learn, myself included. I'm learning new things all the time. So, and our goal is as quickly as possible to get you guys up to speed to basically fulfill Norm's quote here, is so that you will have on the spot answers to those questions, or at least more of those on the spot answers as you progress in your real estate career. So, all right. So this is the deal. We're going to start with the residential listing agreement, just to kind of give you a little idea of what to expect. We will go over darn near every single form that is available in Zip Forms. Okay. There are some that we will go over maybe a little bit faster, or we may just kind of review them in a fashion that says, hey, guess what? If you're interested in commercial, let's do a commercial section. So the reality is we're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time on commercial listings or commercial contracts. We are going to stick this on the residential side, but we will also go through every single form that could apply to a residential transaction, even though they don't apply to every residential transaction. For example, if the property is a trust, well, you're going to use the trust or the probate form. If it's not, you're not. But we will cover those, frankly, those more obscure forms. That's why this is going to take 10 weeks and 90 minutes per. And I'm going to, frankly, we might add a week or two to the end of this. I'm not 100% sure we're going to be able to finish this after 10 sessions. So we are going to start with the listing agreement. This is the type of feedback I would love to get with you guys. I did not randomly say, should we start with the listing side of the transaction or should we start with the purchase side of the transaction? I've kind of done this with some intent and purpose. So if you were coming here thinking, well, geez, I really would have liked to start with the purchase contract first, I can understand that, but this is the direction we're going to go. And ultimately, of course, we will get to the RPA and everything that goes along with it. So again, we're going to start with the residential listing agreement. Again, I know we have various levels of experience here. I'm not going to try to dumb the class down to the newest agent, but I will go through some elementary things that I think we all need to know. I've constantly told you guys that be careful of the acronyms. I'm going to use a lot of acronyms in here, but I will never use an acronym that doesn't jive into what the actual form is. For example, the residential listing agreement is the RLA. I don't know that we all need to memorize those. I occasionally get embarrassed. An agent calls me and says, hey, I'm looking at the whatever, the CCPW. And I'm like, you're looking at the what? Which one is that? Is that the consumer protection, blah, 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 blah. So it's nice to know the acronyms for the form names, but we'll use both interchangeably. Another thing to keep a look at is the revision dates. The revision dates I think are interesting more than anything else. So the residential listing agreement was revised last June, not in December. And some of these you'll notice haven't been revised for years and years and years. So we're going to start with the residential listing agreement. But you'll notice very quickly when you go into Zip Forms and you say, I want to get the residential listing agreement, it gives you a whole lot more than the residential listing agreement. So this is kind of new. When I say kind of new, probably 10 years now. But in the old days, when you asked for the residential listing agreement, it gave you the residential listing agreement and nothing else. Many years ago, the attorneys at CAR said, well, you can't do a residential listing agreement without doing an agency disclosure or a PRBS or whatever it happened to be. And the reason you can't do that is because within the residential listing agreement, it says, oh, by the way, these other forms are included. So CAR and their attorneys in their wisdom, in effect, said, if you're asking for this form and there's other forms that are associated with it, it's giving them to you all at the same time. So again, most of you that have done a few transactions, you are already aware of this. So when you open up that residential listing agreement, you'll first start with the agency disclosure form. It then will take you to the Fair Housing and Discrimination Form, the FHDA. For example, if I see Mehdi on the call, I haven't talked to Mehdi in a little bit. Hey, Mehdi, if Mehdi has said, hey, Lance, I've got a question about the FHDA, you would think that I have that memorized and I would immediately know that that's the Fair Housing Discrimination Advisory. Honestly, I might have had to think about that one for a minute, but at any rate, so we're going to go through the FHDA. Then it's going to pull up the PRBS, which we love so much. And then from the PRBS, then we get the wire fraud. And then after the wire fraud, guess what? We finally get the residential listing agreement that we're looking for. So just keep in mind when you're taking that listing, not only the documents that we're going to review today, but several others will need to be completed. And then I believe best practice is everything that we're going to go through in this package, including the residential listing agreement, is all done at the same time. Okay, so now you would think, hey, we got the residential listing agreement, we're finally done. Well, no, we're not done, because there's still more. After you fill out the residential listing agreement, the RLA, then they say, well, wait a minute, let's throw in the seller's advisory form, which is a disclosure. And let's throw in, last but not least, the California Consumer Privacy Act form. So those are all of the forms. I think there's 14 or 15 pages there. Those are all of the forms that are part of the residential listing agreement. So that's where we're going to start. All right. So if you haven't gone to contract college before, let me give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to do. We're going to go through these forms one by one, paragraph by paragraph, and in some cases, sentence by sentence. Some forms won't quite be that necessary, but others will be like, yeah, boy, Lance spent a lot of time talking about one sentence in one paragraph. This is going to take 5 months to get through here. Yes, there are going to be those where I will spend a lot of time going through what seems like a very small portion of a contract. And then frankly, there will be other times where I will just blow through an entire page. So you're going to kind of discover that as we go. Another thing to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. Hey, Myra, you're unmuted. What do you got? Myra? Maybe Myra's accidentally unmuted. Myra, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to mute you. I'm assuming that was an accident. Unmute yourself again if you had something to participate with here. As you see in my little text here, for the most part, we're going to try to stick with the forms in the order that they are. However, I already know in advance, probably not too much today, but as we move forward in week 2, 3, 4, and 5, we will be on a certain form, and then I will not be able to resist the need to go reference another form. So we're going to mix and bounce around a little bit. That'll be a change that for those of you that previously took contract college, the way Norm had it configured, and I took over for him for the 2 sessions last year, it was kind of difficult for us to say, hey, we're looking at the RPA. Now we need to go over and take a look at the TDS. It was difficult for us to go back and forth with that. So we're going to do a lot of that as this class progresses. So we'll be looking at one form, and then we'll go over and we'll jump over to another form, and then we'll jump back. And I hope I'm going to be able to give you guys the information that's going to make this useful for you. But for the most part, we're going to take these in order and we're going to go through. So we're starting with the agency form. And so this is how I have it queued up again. So for those of you that have been in the class previously, you'll notice an immediate difference. We're not going to use a scrolling form and go through it. I'm using Canva. You guys know how much I love Canva. So we're going to just go through this chunk by chunk. This is why I've given you the PDF version. So if you wanted to print those out and put them next to you, you could kind of follow along a little bit better. You'll notice on the bottom, and we're going to experiment here a little bit on the notes section. Right now, don't really have an effective way for me to say, this is how you guys are going to take your notes, unless you're just printing something out and you're handwriting them yourself. So you can see we have a little ghost in the machine. So I've got Drew sitting right next to me, and he's actually going to type some notes in here as we go. Sometimes we'll have slides that have no notes. Sometimes we'll have some notes that maybe need to go a little deeper than what's allowed here. Ideally, though, I want these to be a reference for you guys, during the session and down the road. And then we'll come up with a little bit different way for you guys to participate in this note section. I've got some ideas that I'm not ready for prime time. Also, I don't have a lot of graphics on these slides. I will at some point start putting, dancing bears and red circles and arrows on things that are important. For now, I just wanted to get the basic content delivered. So down the road, we'll have some highlighted areas for you to take a peek at. Okay, so we're jumping in. So that's the setup. And I know it took 18 minutes to set it up, but now here we go. So I am going to, again, just monitor anybody who's unmuted. So fire away if you have any questions. Otherwise, we're jumping in. Okay, so we're starting with the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. Okay, this is basically the AD form. This is, of course, part of the residential package, as we've discussed. So let's just jump in. So the very first section here, this is relatively new, but I guess not all that new. I think a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, unless you are doing a lease where you're representing the landlord or the tenant, You will not be checking this box. This box will be unchecked. As you can see, it references a transaction for a leasehold interest, a fancy way of saying landlord-tenant relationship. If you are, of course, representing a tenant or a landlord, you may be surprised to know that there's an agency relationship that's established with those landlord-tenant relationships. You must provide the agency disclosure to that landlord or that tenant. Similar to the residential listing agreement, when you pull up a property management agreement, for example, in ZIP forms, it will also populate the Form AD. Or when you pull up a residential lease, it will also pull up the Form AD as part of that. They don't want you to forget. So for most of you guys are not doing that. So you'll bypass that first little section, and we're going to now basically run into the seller's agent. So I am going to train this as a broker to an agent, but I'm also going to do a lot of this presentation as if I was the listing agent and you guys were the seller. So you might kind of hear me transitioning into almost like a listing presentation. This is how I would explain it to a seller. So bottom line is the agency disclosure relationship is required by law. It has to be given to your client. And in effect, it does exactly what the name says. We are disclosing to the client what our relationship is. Who do we represent in the transaction? And what is actually meant and defined by that relationship. So the first option we get is it says, I'm the seller's agent. I'm representing you. I'm the listing agent. I represent the seller. So what do we have here? Basically, it describes that the seller's agent under a listing agreement. So it's making reference to, we're going to have a listing agreement and acts that I'm going to basically conduct on behalf of the seller. And I only represent the seller. So in this case, I'm the listing agent. I don't represent the buyer. The seller's agent or the sub-agent. And again, you'll see references to sub-agent periodically. That used to kind of sort of be a big thing. Generally speaking, we don't really use that term sub-agent a lot. This is kind of a remnant from the past. But basically, the seller's agent has the affirmative obligations. So this sentence here, to the seller, this is really what the agency form is all about. I, as the listing agent, have a fiduciary duty of the utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in all dealings with the seller. This is what I refer to as I cannot lie, cheat, or steal when I'm dealing with the seller. I have to do exactly what this says. For those of you that are, like Drew's typing in, can't lie, cheat, or steal. I love it. So a fiduciary duty, by the way, is just the highest standard of duty. If you're not familiar with that term, it's not a word that we generally use a whole heck of a lot, but that's in effect what this is referring to. I have the highest standard of duty, the utmost care. I cannot lie, cheat, or steal. I got to basically be above board all the time. Now, those are my responsibilities to the seller. Okay. But I also, even though I don't represent the buyer, I also have duties that do extend to the seller and the buyer. Okay. So with my seller, highest duty, cannot lie, cheat, or steal. But on the buy side, in this case, if I don't represent the buyer, I also have a duty to diligently exercise reasonable skill and care in the performance of my agent's duties. Now, this one, quite honestly, can be a little bit laughable. For many of us who've been doing this for a long time, it doesn't take us very long to realize that the other agents in a transaction are not exercising what we would call a reasonable skill or care and performance of their duties. They haven't been to contract college. They haven't been trained. They're just out there winging it. Okay. Well, per our civil code and per basically statute, you really can't do that. You're not supposed to go out there and wing it. If you can't perform with a reasonable skill and care, then you shouldn't be doing it at all. So again, we can debate, whether or not we're meeting that standard or not, but that's what it's talking about. I also have a duty to be honest and fair dealings and in good faith with both parties. Okay. You cannot lie to a client that you're technically not an agent of. So again, our example here is I'm representing the seller, but I don't represent the buyer. The buyer is represented by another agent at another office. Well, even though I don't have a fiduciary duty to them, I do have a duty to be honest with them. and I have a duty to be fair, and I have a duty to act in good faith. Again, if you've been doing this business for any period of time, we could all come up with examples that, well, that agent flat out lied, or they just weren't being fair, or they weren't acting in good faith. I can give you hundreds of examples of this happens on a regular basis, but the bottom line, you can't do it. So one example of this, for example, is you represent the seller, and the seller is disclosing some information to you that is pertinent to the transaction. Okay, material fact, and we're going to use that word material a lot over the next 10 weeks. So what that might be. So I'm at the listing and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, why are you selling the house? Like, well, geez, I'm selling the house because that neighbor across the street is just, they're horrible people, and you think they do drugs, and they're playing loud music, and it's just a monster, and I got to get away from these people. Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit more about what that seller just did in relation to the disclosure responsibilities, but those words cannot be taken back. I heard them, okay? And now that I tell the seller, oh, okay, well, hold on a minute, maybe before you say too much more, we might want to have a discussion about the disclosure responsibilities and also my disclosure responsibilities. So in this example, if my seller tells me the reason they're moving is because there is a huge problem with the property across the street, I have to be honest and fair and act in good faith to the client, the buyer on that particular transaction, and in effect disclose that fact. Okay. And I also have to make sure that my seller now understands, oh, guess what? You now have got to put some information on a transfer disclosure statement that you may otherwise wouldn't have had to put on there. So that is one example of, you have information you must disclose, even though you're disclosing it to potentially someone who is not your client. Okay. And again, getting back to paragraph C, I kind of jumped ahead. So I also have a duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or the desirability. So that's I kind of skipped ahead of myself, but that is the example, is I now have a material fact that needs to be disclosed. Now you might have a question that says, well, hey, Lance, how do I know if it's material? I'm going to give you an example that's probably a little too simplistic, but I think it works for most of the time. If you're asking yourself if it's material, it's material. Okay. So in other words, over disclosing is better than under disclosing. That can create some problems for you and your seller. I've had this happen many times where I have information and the seller's like, well, why are you doing that? You're going to kill the deal. I'm like, well, I understand that, but my intention is to be in this business for an extended period of time, not one transaction. So those are the basic seller's agent's responsibilities. So what we're in effect doing is if we represent the seller, we're declaring our relationship. And in this case, our declaration is we represent you or the seller. We are your agent, and these are our responsibilities. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second, and I literally mean a second. Unmute if you've got anything. I don't see anybody unmuted, so I'm gonna. Oh, Andre, go for it.
Yeah, Lance, I see sometimes they always call me because I've never represented the seller, but they always, when I call an escrow, they be like, you're a seller's agent, right? I'm like, well, I'm the buyer's agent, but I guess I'm the seller's agent. I'm like, why is that like a intertwinable thing?
Yeah, well, you're not the seller's agent. What they're saying is you are the selling agent. Okay, this is one of those things. Great question, by the way, Andre. And if you guys, and I hope that we keep everybody on this call for the next 10 weeks, and I don't lose one person. And frankly, I hope we start adding people. So remember this moment. Remember Andre's question. There is some vernacular within the forms and within our industry that can be extremely confusing, and you just stumbled on one. Okay. Over here, they are describing the listing agent as the seller's agent. Okay. Escrow calls Andre and says, are you the selling agent? Okay. And the selling agent is not the seller's agent. Okay. So there's two words, I suppose, that we need to use interchangeably here. Is when they say, are you the selling agent? What they're saying is, are you the buyer's agent? So selling agent and buyer's agent are the same things. That's the agent representing the buyer. Listing agent and seller's agent are the same thing. Okay. And this is one of those things, and I've been involved, you guys have heard me say this 1,000 times. I've been involved at CAR forever. I've been doing this forever and forever. I've been like, can't we just kind of clean up some of the language here a little bit? This can be very, very confusing. Let's just call the buyer's agent everywhere. And let's call the seller's agent everywhere. Let's not use listing agent, seller's agent, selling agent, buyer's agent. And you're going to stumble on this. There's many, many places in these forms where that type of language is used. So, Andres, the short answer to your question is they are categorizing you correctly. They're just using the word ing, selling agent. Yes, you brought in the buyer, therefore you are deemed the selling agent. So all right, I'm going to press on. We'll have lots of opportunities to put a little more color on that if we need it. So next page, you'll notice this looks like it's almost exactly word for word as the previous page. It is pretty much almost exactly word for word in the previous page. The only difference is we've now are identifying the buyer's agent. Okay. So what is the buyer's agent's responsibility? I'm going to skip over to this line. Fiduciary duty to the utmost care, honesty, integrity in all dealings with the buyer. It is word for word the same as the seller's agent's responsibility, just interchanging the word buyer for seller. Next line below, same thing. Okay. The buyer's agent, in the same way that the seller's agent, the listing agent, has a responsibility to disclose things and be honest and be fair with the other party, the buyer's agent has the same responsibility to the seller. Okay. Again, have to exercise reasonable care, have the duty to be honest. I have to be fair. I can't lie, cheat, or steal. Same exact responsibilities. And then they also have the same responsibility to disclose facts known to the agent that materially affect the value or the desirability of the property that are not known to blah, 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 blah. Okay. So those same exact duties apply. Now, where this gets a little interesting is on this item C for where the buyer, it's entirely possible. And again, there's some seasoned people on this call where that you've been in a transaction, and in that transaction, you don't represent the seller, you represent the buyer. But it becomes very clear to you very quickly that you actually know more about this house or this neighborhood or this homeowners association or whatever than the actual listing agent does. Okay. In other words, you have material information that it could affect the value or the desirability of that property that, quite honestly, maybe the seller doesn't even know, or maybe the listing agent doesn't know. When you find yourself in that situation, just refer back to, paragraph C. You as the buyer's agent have a duty to disclose that. Maybe you did a transaction in this homeowners association and you disclosed it. You've got a new buyer. You know something's going on. You know that there's going to be a raise, a homeowners association dues increase. And maybe, quite honestly, maybe the seller's not paying attention. They don't know that. Maybe the listing agent doesn't know that, but you do. Okay. So that information must be disclosed. But short of that, basically everything you're looking at here is identical to the listing agent or seller's agent's responsibilities. Julio, I see you're unmuted. Go for it.
Yeah, Lance, just a quick question. In terms of disclosure on that example of the louder neighbor or the neighbor who's doing the narcotic activity next door, et cetera, how much in-depth information do you have to disclose? I mean, can you just disclose that there's a problematic neighbor, or do you have to go into a lot of detail? Because I took norms classes in the past, and when we talked about doing the walkthrough, not to overstate what you visibly see. If you see a dark spot on the wall, you don't say, I see mold. You just, I see a dark spot. So using that neighbor example, how much disclosure do we have to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, Julio, if assuming you're on the class several weeks from now, we're going to say, oh, remember when Julio said, don't over disclose? Got to be very careful when you use that language, because if you're brand new in the business and you're like, wait a minute, let me don't over disclose. I thought I needed to disclose everything. And you do, but you need to be careful. So let's use it. I'm going to answer your question, but let's use a different example first. So you're doing a final walkthrough and you're doing your Avid, and on the Avid, you see a crack in a tile on the floor. Okay. So what Norm would have told you, or what some of the loss mitigation attorneys would tell you, is don't over or under describe the crack. So for example, I observed a crack in the kitchen floor, period. Okay, so in other words, don't describe it as I observed a large crack in the floor, a small crack in the floor. I observed 2 or 3 cracks in the floor. That's where, in part, the spirit of over disclosing can cause a problem, in part because your definition of a large crack or a small crack might be different. I have a story, it'll take me a half hour to tell, where we got sued, and we got sued over a handrail that was loose, and a tenant had breached the handrail, and supposedly it was unsafe, and they had fallen down the stairs. And in court, we were defining, well, how loose is loose? Is it a little wiggle or is it a major wiggle? So we spent hours in depositions going over the definition of what was loose or how loose it was. So be very, very careful on those things. Now, getting back to this garage example, I just think you need to disclose what you know. So if the seller said, hey, I've got a problem across the street, there's always loud music and partying and gang activity, what I would describe is I would say the seller has informed me of the following things. There's a problem across the street, there's loud noise, possible gang activity, and whatever it happens to be, I would put that in. Now I will tell you along those lines, when I have sellers and they start to over disclose to me, I kind of stop them for a minute. I said, okay, just be careful, because sometimes people exaggerate. Okay. And I don't want my seller to not give me accurate information, but I also don't want them to just over embellish. Oh my God, that little kid across the street, he's such a monster. Blah, blah. Well, just slow down. Is he just a little kid, or is he really truly a monster? So you got to be careful with that. But on that example, you need to disclose what you know. Okay. I will take 30 seconds, give you guys a quick story. I don't know if Drew was working with me at the time, but many years ago, we were selling, I believe it was a foreclosure, and represented the buyer. I don't know if we represented the buyer or not. All I know is we closed escrow, and 2 days later, the buyer is in our office basically saying, will you sell my house? Would you list this house? And I'm like, what? So yes, we moved in. There's a problem across the street and we can't live here. And that was a true story. And as my recollection is, we listed that house, we put it on the market. They moved in that house for 2 days and they moved out. And that was a possible disclosure issue. Ultimately didn't come of anything. But if the seller had known that there was this problem and didn't disclose this particular problem, then that could have been a potential liability for that seller by not disclosing that to the buyer. Or in our case, because I'm pretty sure we were the listing agent on that transaction as well. If we didn't know that there was an issue across the street, or let me rephrase it, if we did know there was an issue across the street. So this happens. It happens all the time with all sorts of different scenarios. So again, buyer's agents, same responsibilities as the selling agent, and we are disclosing on the the agency disclosure form what that relationship is. Okay, agent representing both buyer and seller. This is the lovely dual agent, and I say lovely, as if it's a negative. It's not a negative. We are very blessed to be able to represent both parties in a transaction. However, this does create some additional challenges for us. And frankly, it creates some additional liability for us. Okay. So the challenges are, again, you have to walk that fine line. Let's read through the form and then we'll talk it through here a little bit. So an agent representing either party, okay, buyer or seller in a transaction, the key items here are A and B, has a fiduciary duty, same exact to both the buyer and the seller. Okay. And all of the duties stated above are just elevated to that fiduciary level. So again, the utmost highest level of care in representing both parties. Now, where this becomes a challenge is a lot of times you'll find yourself kind of in a little bit in a pickle, because you might have a client who feels that maybe you're favoring the seller over them. Okay. Or you seem to be negotiating harder for the buyer, Lance, than you are for me. Are you my agent or are you their agent? Well, the reality is I'm both of your agents. And if you are starting to have those conversations with your buyer or seller, and frankly, if they're indicating to you that they think that you might be, treating the other party a little bit better than them, I'm telling you, it is a huge problem. And you are potentially in an area that you don't want to be. So in order to avoid that, you must extensively explain to both your buyer and your seller what that relationship is. I oversimplify this, but I've used this example forever, or there's probably a better one, but hey, this is the deal. I'm here to advise you guys, but at the end of the day, think of me as like the referee in a tennis match, okay? And you guys are going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I'm observing, making sure everybody's following the rules and, you know, calling balls that are in and out and all the rest of that sort of stuff. But in theory, the red, I don't even know that's what you call them. Is that what they call the guys at the tennis match, sit in the chair, referees? Anyway, whatever those guys are, they're supposed to be fair. All right. You can't put your thumb on the scale of one side or the other. Otherwise, you're going to run afoul of the agency law. So in this case, you just need to make sure that both your buyers are vividly aware that you're representing both parties and that you have to treat both parties fairly. Now, where this does get a little bit tricky, and it might sound like, wait a minute, Lance, that sounds a little different than what you just said a minute ago. There are some areas where it's kind of understood that you are allowed to withhold information from the other party. Okay. So that sounds wrong. What do you mean? You said I have to disclose everything. It's a matter of fact. Well, yeah, but again, not everything. So the law basically recognizes when you're representing a buyer or the seller, at least in the initial negotiation, that you don't have to tell the buyer that the seller said, hey, I'll take $750, even though I'm listed for $775. Okay. And as a matter of fact, not only do you not have to tell the buyer that, you should not be telling the buyer that, hey, guess what? The seller told me they'll take $750. You can't do that. Okay. And in the same way, if the buyer, you're writing an offer for that buyer and the buyer writes an offer for $750, but the buyer also says, but hey, I'm willing to pay $775. Let's just negotiate this out a little bit. You cannot run into the seller and say, hey, I have an offer for $750. Oh, but by the way, he told me he'll take $775. Okay. You are violating your fiduciary duty to both parties. And I can understand how that can feel a little bit conflicted and a little bit problematic because again, well, where does the loyalty lie? Well, in the negotiation process, it lies with that individual who has given you information in confidence. Okay. So you have to be very, very careful with that. I will tell you, if you do this business long enough and you are in this situation, you will find yourself struggling with this a little bit, but just understand that you are not allowed to divulge or disclose any of that. Now, there are some rare cases where a buyer, let's use my example, where the buyer will tell you, it says, hey, I know we're writing it for $750, but I give you permission to tell them I'll go higher. Okay. Now you might say, well, why? That's kind of a weird one. Why would they do that? Well, maybe there's multiple offers on the table. And the buyer's, kind of giving you the verbal, but you'd be very careful with that as well. So the dual agency thing is it's worked for us for many years. It would not surprise me if at some point before my real estate career is over, the state of California bans dual agency completely, and you basically will not be allowed to represent the buyer and the seller in the transaction. But that's the nuts and bolts of it. One other quick little definition of dual agency you guys need to remember. Let me give you 3 examples. Okay, so Andre has a listing. Andre holds an open house. Buyer comes in working with not another agent. Andre takes that buyer. Andre writes the offer, gets it accepted by the seller. Andre is a dual agent, representing both the buyer and seller. Pretty standard, pretty easy. Then same example, except now Andre's got the listing. Andy comes in, brings in the buyer. Let's just suppose Andre and Andrew, they don't even know each other, but guess what? They both work at Coldwell Banker, Town and Country in the Moreno Valley office. And the first time they've done a deal together, first time maybe they've actually met, that's a dual agent. It is exactly the same situation as Andre representing the buyer and the seller. Exactly. Okay. But now we have 2 different agents working under the same brokerage. Now let's bring Javier in. Javier works in Covina, Coldwell Banker, Town and Country. Andre works in Moreno Valley. They don't even know each other, never even met each other. That's the exact same situation as Andy and Andre. They both work under the same brokerage. So you have that dual agency basically throughout the brokerage. So anybody at Coldwell Banker, Town and Country working under Drew's broker's license is going to fall under that dual agency. Now, what if they work at Coldwell Banker Associated Brokers is down in Menifee? Coldwell Banker. That could be very confusing to a client. Well, you guys all work at Coldwell Banker. Well, we do, but that is a different broker. Therefore, that is not a dual agency relationship. It would have to be under the same exact brokerage. So my word of caution to you guys, I'm not telling you guys not to write offers on dual properties, do it. We do it all the time. Generally, we like it. Hey, there's a bunch of great reasons why that could be a win-win-win for everybody, but just go into it being very, very careful. One other caveat on this, though, you can have let's, for lack of a better word, call it a mega dual agency. And what I mean by a mega dual, by the way, there's no such thing as a mega, I just made that up. But what I'm talking about is, let's use Andre as our listing agent. Andre's holding an open house. Buyer comes in at noon on Sunday. They love it. Andre writes an offer for that buyer sitting at the kitchen table on that house. 2 hours later, another buyer comes in. Okay. They want it. Andre now writes another offer for another buyer on his open house. Okay. 2 hours later, another. Okay. So you guys get the idea. Okay. Oh my gosh. Can that be done? Yes. Is it legal? Yes. Are you asking for trouble? Absolutely asking for trouble. Okay. So in that example I just gave you, if I was Andre and that second buyer comes in on my open house, I'd say, oh my gosh, I'd just be very transparent with him. I'm the listing agent. I just wrote an offer for Mr. and Mrs. Smith 2 hours ago. You obviously want this house. Let me call another one of my associates at Coldwell Banker Town and Country and have them write it. Okay. Now, guess what, though? It's still dual agent. So if Andre refers that buyer to Javier, and Javier writes it, but Javier still works for Coldwell Banker Town and Country, we still have the same dual agency issue. So just be careful, guys. Disclose, and you'll be safer. This is a very, very an area that frankly concerns us a lot. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into the seller and buyer's responsibilities. So the buyer and seller also have responsibilities. Gonna go through this a little bit quicker.
Hey, Lance, before you move on, could I just?
Yep, go ahead. Hey, Andre, you muted yourself again, but yeah, go ahead. Unmute yourself and go.
Sorry about that, Lance. Can you hear me now?
I got you. Yep.
Okay, yeah, because on the purchase agreement, it does say on the RPA that you could be representing more than one seller on the proper representation of more than one buyer or seller disclosure. It says I could represent multiple buyer or multiple sellers. So in that instance, let's say I was a dual agent, right? And I wrote an offer for my friend Jessica and I wrote an offer for my friend Martin. Basically, couldn't I just disclose to them that, hey, I'm representing you both and you guys both have offers, and the offer that's going to go is going to be the one that my seller chooses, not me?
Correct. 100%. There's nothing wrong with it. You just need to be extremely careful. And we're going to actually review the PRBS form here. It's coming up here in the next form or two. And I'm going to give you the examples that you just gave and a couple of other examples, because that PRBS, there's a little more going on there than what most people think it is. And by the way, what most people think it is what you just described. And it is that. So this is the deal, guys. It can be done. We're just telling you, you got to be super careful. And again, we've got some experienced people here, and I've had this happen on our transactions more than once. I've had agents come to me where we've had this issue more than once. And basically the conversation is, Lance, I don't know what to do. My seller is upset with me because they think I'm favoring the buyer. Okay. And I got to tell you, man, that is trouble. Okay. Or again, I'm now representing two buyers on the same listing. And you just tell them that. You tell the buyer, say, hey man, I'm representing, Sally Smith. And well, what was their offer, Andre? Would tell me what their offer was. Well, you can't tell them what their offer is. Like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean you can't tell me what their offer? Are you representing me or not? So again, having that conversation, frankly, is easy, but it doesn't necessarily go over easily because clients are kind of like, well, geez, man, it doesn't feel like you're looking out after my best interest. It sounds like what you're doing is, hey, just write it up and then I'll go ahead and we'll let the buyer or let the seller decide, which by the way, is true. And what you said is absolutely true, but it's just fraught with peril. Okay. So, and this topic is going to come up multiple times over the next 10 weeks. So we're going to revisit this many, many times. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I don't know if you answered this already or I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but is it the actual brokerage for a dual agency that would be the same? Like, for example, if you represented the buyer and then Drew or somebody else represented the seller, it would still be dual agency in that sense as well?
Correct, correct.
Okay.
So, and again, I'm gonna get into the weeds here a little bit, and these are maybe the type of things that, you know, I don't know if we want to put these things in notes or not, but let's use Coldwell Banker Town and Country. Okay. Oh, you already have it in there on the previous one or in this one? Let me go back. Okay, so it looks like Drew's got some notes in here. It looks like we might be running out of room on the notes, so we'll clean these up so you can see these a little bit better. But you know, if you go to the DRE's website and you search Coldwell Banker Town and Country, or if you search DLD Partners, that's who we are. That's our corporate name, DLD Partners. You will see that Drew is the broker of record on our company. You will see that Drew has a branch license in 4 offices, and you will see that Drew has whatever it is, 200 agents working under his license. Any one of those 200 agents are under his license. Any one of those 200 agents would represent a dual agency. Okay, so that's that when I say brokerage, I'm referring to who is working underneath that individual broker's license. Clear as mud?
Yeah, thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that.
No problem. So again, buyers and sellers have some responsibilities here. So, and in effect, what they're talking about here is that, you know, number one, they need to pay attention to what the confirmation is. I mean, they need to understand what our role is. Now, the reality is if we spend 0 time explaining this to them, the only thing that they're looking at is this document. This document is written in plain English. It's fairly easy to understand, but we do this every day. Buyers and sellers don't do this every day. And we need to make sure that the buyers understand what we're doing here. My batteries, I don't think it's going to fit in there. Drew. I'm going to plug in. Let me scoot down here a little bit. My batteries or my laptop's going to die here. So, so again, the buyer has a responsibility to understand. Okay, the buyer has a responsibility to basically do some due diligence on what that one doesn't work, what their responsibilities are. The buyer has a responsibility to seek advice. For example, it says we're not giving tax advice, legal advice, estate planning advice. So this is just kind of the standard thing. Says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we have a responsibility to do this, but by the way, you also have some responsibilities. And this is a theme that is carried out through the entire contract and the RPA. One example in the RPA is, you know, the buyer has a responsibility to do some due diligence, to do an inspection. They can't just completely rely upon their agent or the seller to make those disclosures. So that's the body of the rest of the AD, and we've just got the signature block. This is pretty simple. Again, I am not a big fan of this. I wish that they would change this. You know, for example, we know that we're doing a listing. Why do we know we're doing a listing? Because we said, give us the residential listing agreement. So I wish they would give us a form that didn't have the word landlord tenant in here. This is a universal form. It's used for buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants. So I just have to stop complaining about it. So this is just the signature block. So again, let's use our example. I'm representing the seller. I'm the listing agent here. I would check the selling box. I would go ahead and Mr. and Mrs. Seller would execute here. They would date here. Of course, if there's multiple sellers, they would go ahead and execute here and date here. Interestingly enough, you know, I just noticed on this form, they don't have a place for an additional signature addendum. So if you did have 4 sellers, you just have another TDS, excuse me, TDS, goodness gracious, have another AD and they would sign accordingly. Under e-agent, read your instructions. This is one of those things that happens all the time. The real estate broker firm, that is not you, that is not Drew, that is the company. Okay, so where it says agent can be very confusing. Agent is not you. Real estate broker is not Drew. Real estate firm is Coldwell Banker. So the company goes here. The company, Coldwell Banker's Town and Country's DRE license goes here. The buy is you. Okay, so this is the salesperson or the broker associate. So if you're using zip forms, you guys know you can't print out a zip form without certain information going in. So my name's going to be on these. So your name will print. You will sign your name here. You will put your license here, and then you will put it the date that you're executing this. This is not a form that the broker needs to sign. Okay, Drew does not sign these, or the office manager does not sign the agency form. So company name, company license, your signature, your name, your license, your date. Okay, so now the rest of this, a little bit quicker. I am not going to read California Civil Code to you, but if you're kind of wondering what's the genesis of the agency disclosure form, you're looking at it. Okay, California Civil Code, basically, 2079.3 through 2079.24, in effect, says these are all of the rules and regulations and the laws that we are governed by when we are basically completing an agency disclosure. I am not going to go through this. So if you have questions, you can come back to me at a later date and say, hey, would you please describe to me what paragraph F is? This is the remainder of that. This section, if this looks familiar to you, this is the confirmation section. As you can see, it's telling you, do not complete this. This is a sample only. I cannot tell you how many times I see agents attempting handwrite, information in here. I'm like, why are you handwriting on this? It says, do not complete this, sample only. This confirmation is going to be confirmed on the RPA. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to resist the need to jump from one form to another. This might be one of those forms when I teach this class the second time, where I just pull up a quick screenshot of the RPA that says on the RPA, you will see this exact language. And this is the confirmation of who's representing who. The reason that's important, think about this in a timeline, okay? In a timeline, I'm taking the listing. Like I'm gonna be Andre. I'm taking the listing, I'm the listing agent. When the seller is signing the agency disclosure, we don't have a buyer yet. We don't know who the buyer's brokers is going to be. We don't know if the buyer's broker is also going to be Andre. It could be, but when we take the listing, that side of the transaction is unknown. So we're giving the seller kind of an example that says, hey, right now I'm your agent. I'm representing you as the seller. It's possible I could be the buyer's agent. Oh, and guess what? When we get to that point, we are going to confirm that. We're going to do that agency confirmation. And again, you guys will see that in the RPA. There's also another form that actually is an agency confirmation. For the most part, we don't really require that because we're getting that confirmation done in the actual purchase agreement. And one second, and this is just the bottom last section of page 2, which again has just got a few more details. I'm not going to read this. This is truly quoting civil code. So if you're an attorney or want to play one on television, you can Google these and it'll take you right to the civil code, California Civil Code, and it'll go through that. You'll notice there is no signature or initial block on the bottom of page 2. Okay, they only are signing the bottom of page 1 on the agency form. Okay, guys, guess what? We've gone for a full hour and we finished our very first form. We only have 300 more forms to go. So any questions on the agency? Okay, I don't see anybody unmuted. There, and again, you guys can come and go. Actually, you should not be coming and going. You should stick with us through this entire course. One thing that does become a little bit problematic if you come into the course a little bit later, there will be a lot of opportunities in other areas of the contract for me to redefine what agency is. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, we already talked about agency on day 1, hour 1. So I'm not going to be going through when we get to these different sections of the contract to basically say what I just spent a lot of time going through. So this is one reason why, try to stick with us for the entire window. Of course, we are recording this on our Facebook page. You could go back there and take a look at it, but sometimes these things take longer, but then we catch up as we go. Okay, so the next form in line is the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. It's pretty straightforward stuff, guys. I mean, kind of like on the other one, do not lie, cheat, or steal. Well, on this one is, hey, treat everybody fairly. Otherwise, you're going to run afoul of the Fair Housing and Discrimination laws. So we don't want to do that. I'm not going to go through this super fast, but goodness gracious, I'm hoping we all kind of understand what we're dealing with here. So in effect, again, hey, equal access and housing for everybody. There's laws, there's statutes that say you cannot discriminate against basically anybody. Okay. There's state laws, there's federal laws. For those of you that recently took your real estate exam, some of these may look familiar. There's a Civil Rights Act that part of that Civil Rights Act includes federal fair housing. You've got to basically comply with that. There is the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, okay? And the FEHA, California Government Code, that in effect says, you cannot discriminate against people in housing. I remember the Unruh Civil Rights Act from my real estate exam when I took it 35 years ago, and it goes through, and again, it talks about, again, you got to be fair with everybody. So all of Americans with disabilities, if you've got somebody who's handicapped, they're in a wheelchair, whatever it happens to be. And I said handicap. I'm not even sure if we can use the word handicapped. Maybe I got to check myself here. And hey, no, it's somebody who's disabled and they're in a wheelchair. So we've got to comply with all the ADA rules. So in effect, again, we have to make sure that we're not even remotely could be confused or misunderstood, that we're, again, only color that matters is green. I like that. Second page, or actually, excuse me, I'm on the same page on our form. And now it's kind of talking about a few things. What are the potential legal remedies? What happens if I run afoul here, okay, and I get myself in trouble? Well, there are legal remedies. They're monetary. They're injunctive relief. You could lose your real estate license. All sorts of bad things can happen if you're accused of and found guilty of violating any of these. So, again, let's do the right thing. Protected classes. Most of us are kind of familiar with the protected classes. So what are we referring to? Well, you cannot discriminate on the basis of age, okay, unless it's a senior citizen community of 55 and older, okay? They are allowed to do that, but other than that, you can't say, hey, no, you're too old to buy this, or you're too whatever it happens to be. Sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, familial status, citizenship. Well, you don't have to be a citizen to purchase real estate in the United States. Immigration status, language. Hey, I don't work with people that don't speak English. Oh boy, that's a problem. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to work with somebody. I don't speak Spanish. I don't think I can represent them properly. Well, that's a different conversation. Hey, let me get you over to somebody within my office that speaks Spanish. You just can't blanket say, I don't want to do business with somebody who doesn't speak my language. And where you really run into trouble with that is if that's going to be, hey, I don't do that because I don't speak the language. Well, then you better always not do that. So in other words, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith come in and you're like, I don't want to work with you because I don't speak Spanish, but then Mr. and Mrs. Jones come in and then you do want to work with them, but they only speak Spanish. Well, that's a discriminatory thing. Well, yeah, but I liked them a little bit better. Well, that's what we're trying to avoid. You don't want to basically just say, well, I'm going to work with you because I like you. Veteran military status, Section 8. This is more on the Section 8 source of income. This is more, for example, on a landlord-tenant relationship. So if somebody comes to you and says, I have a Section 8 voucher, you can't just automatically say, well, I'm not going to rent to you. Okay. You would be discriminated against them based upon the source of their income, medical conditions, so on and so forth. So again, those are the defined protected classes. California Department of Real Estate requires training and supervision to prevent housing discrimination. So this is part of our continuing education now. So in order to continue to renew your license, and I believe even get your license now, I probably should know this. Maybe somebody that recently took their exam. I'm assuming it's part of the original portion, but basically it's 3 hours of training. If you've already got your license and you're renewing your license, this is part of your continuing education, your 45 hours, and that's required by DRE. And then again, there's a violation of DRE regulations if you are found to be discriminating in this area. So again, again, I like it. There is no gray area. You don't mess around with this. You're just, number one, you can't work in our office if I even get a hint of that, but it's obviously not the right thing to do. In addition to all the state and federal prohibitions, the realtor organizations have it as well. When you become a realtor and you basically, pledge to become a realtor through NAR and CR, the Code of Ethics, of course, also prohibits this. Who is also required to comply with this? Everybody in the transaction is required to comply with this. They have sellers listed over here. If you're on that listing appointment, I've had this happen once, long time ago, but I had it happen once where I specifically had a seller that says, you will not sell to anybody other than this particular type of individual. Period. Gee, that was a long time ago. And I was said, well, thank you very much, but I can't do business with you, and got up and left. Okay. So you can't have sellers that are discriminatory. If you're working with landlords and tenants, you cannot be working with a landlord that says, hey, and I'll give you one that's maybe a little more subtle is, oh, I've just remodeled my house and I want you to help me rent it out, but I don't want a large family with a whole bunch of kids. Okay. Well, that's discriminatory. That's discriminatory on the family type. And some of you might be shocked to learn, but if I have a 4-bedroom rental and I have a tenant that applies and that tenant has 9 people, you might go to the landlord and says, okay, this is the deal. We got mom and dad and 7 kids. And the landlord goes, oh my God, that's too many kids. I just put in new carpet and paint. I don't want that. You cannot deny them housing because they have a family of 9. The rule on rentals is 2 people per bedroom and 1 person in the living room. So 4 bedrooms, that's 8 plus 1, 9 people. So some of those might not be quite as obvious, and you might not even realize that you've kind of stepped over the line. So be very, very careful with that. And again, we've got some examples. I don't think I'm going to go through these examples of conduct that might not be motivated. So you guys can take a look at these on your own. So paragraph 8's got some examples of some bad contact. And then paragraph 9, again, it has some, actually, maybe I got that backwards. Examples of content that may not be motivated by, okay. So again, this is kind of what I just said. This paragraph 8 kind of sort of maybe falls into that example. I didn't really mean it, but I guess I fell into that. So again, be careful. Oh, here, I like this example. I don't want to rent to the second story to an older family because, heck, who wants to walk up and downstairs? Not for you to decide. Okay. Not for you to decide. If they're 90 years old and they want to walk upstairs, let them figure that out. So again, these are the examples of some improper conduct. You guys can go through those on your own. And then I believe we have some additional examples of the things we need to keep an eye on. Again, I don't know that we need to go through all of these. And if you guys have a question or an example, you can unmute yourself and we can go through it. It just gives you some examples of things to be careful on. And then, of course, some positive things. These are some things that we want to strive for. I will tell you the gist of what a lot of this is you just got to treat everybody the same way and just got to treat everybody fairly. Here again, here's my example of, English speakers only or no children or that sort of stuff. So let's do the right thing and we should be able to, stay within the rules. Paragraph 11 basically has all the resources for your buyer and seller to check this stuff out. So if they have some concerns, or they think that maybe something's run afoul, you can refer them to HUD, you can refer them to the Department of Fair Housing or Fair Employment and Housing. By the way, I don't know exactly why employment's mixed in with housing. I just think they just kind of threw it all together. So these are the areas where they can go get some additional information if they feel that they've been run across the line. There are some exceptions. Okay, so there are some areas where, wait a minute, how do I do this? And we talked about the 55 and older communities and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So you've got some limited exceptions for fair housing requirements. No person should rely on the exception below without first seeking legal advice. So again, be very, very. What's that?
55 and older. I'm surprised they still allow it.
Drew's off mic a little bit saying, I'm surprised that they still even allow a 55 and older community. Well, they're carved out in the law, but you're right, Drew. It's entirely possible at some point in time, someone will challenge that and say, why is this? Now you're discriminating in reverse. Now you're discriminating against younger people, or you're discriminating against small children and families. Because let's face it, my mom and dad live at Sun Lakes. And I mean, it's not written in the rule. I suppose they could have a grandkid live with them. But I got to tell you don't see a lot of grandkids living at any of these properties. It's all basically older people. So at any rate, so these are some limitations in here. And then, of course, we get to the signature block. Again, buyer tenant, they're using them interchangeably. And of course, this form is required, by the way, when you're representing a landlord and tenant. That's why it's got it there. So, of course, the buyer would sign and date here. The seller would sign and date here. There is no place on this form for the agents to sign. Okay, which I find a little interesting. Anyway, so the buyers and sellers sign here and away we go. Dwayne, what you got?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that if agents need to read a book, it's called The Color of Law, The Color of Law by
Okay.
Richard Bronstein, and you'll understand why these forms had to come into play.
Amen. Go ahead and type that into the notes, Drew. It's The Color of Law by Richard Bernstein. Yeah. Okay, Drew will type that into the notes section. And before, since Dwayne had mentioned that, you guys will run into this periodically. And if you want to, and Dwayne's kind of, hearkening back and saying, hey, there's a reason that these laws came into play. And there was some horrible things that were going on in housing and otherwise. You guys will run into this periodically. And it's, boy, if you really want an eye opener of some of our country's past, you'll go grab a set of CC&Rs on a property from the 50s or the 40s or the 30s, and you'll read through some of the language in there that is blatantly just it's troubling to even read it, as far as the discriminatory nature of who would be allowed to buy this property, whether it was white people, black people, women. You're not allowed to even buy this property. You'll still see that documentation in some very, very old CC&Rs. Now, that's been stricken out. That's all illegal. Some of these laws that we just referred to said, if you have an older property with older CC&Rs that have discriminatory language, that language is no longer legal, but it's still there. That's a really, it's super disturbing to go back and see some of that. You don't have to go back that far, quite honestly. You can go back and pull a prelim and some CC&Rs on a property back in the 50s and before that, and it'll really open your eyes quite a bit. So, okay. And it looks like Drew to put a link to that book on Amazon. Nice. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And for those of you that see these notes are kind of, there's not enough room in there. We'll clean that up. We'll get that cleaned up, maybe resize it as well. Okay, so keep it on going. I think Andre or somebody had mentioned the PRBS. So here we are. Guess what? PRBS. And by the way, we're still trying to get to that listing agreement. And if you're wondering if we're going to get to the listing agreement today, we are not. We're going to get to the listing agreement next Thursday. We'll hit that and we'll finish the rest of that portion. So possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. So this is that form that your buyers and sellers will sign on every single transaction. And it in effect says, frankly, what we've already talked about, but there's also a little bit more associated with it. So for example, we've got our disclosure that says, hey, I might be working with multiple buyers, or frankly, my brokerage might be working with multiple buyers, or again, very similar, almost identical language. We're working with multiple sellers. So let me give you two examples that maybe are a little different than what we've already talked about. So this is the deal. I'm representing a buyer. Somebody comes to me from Zillow. They're looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet in Riverside for $450, whatever it happens to be. Great. I have a search. I'm looking for that buyer for that property. 2 days later, another buyer comes to me looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet in Riverside around $450. They basically want the exact same house. Okay. So in that example, if I'm going to truly work with buyer one and buyer two, that they want the same thing, I have to treat them equally. I have to basically call them both up. Hey, guess what? I found your house. Oh, by the way, I'm actually working with somebody else who also wants this exact same house. You have to be very, very transparent with them. Okay, now then, of course, that begs the question, like, well, geez, but you're going to make sure I get it, right? Well, if you write the best offer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and your offer rises to the top, then your offer is going to get accepted. But Lance, I know, but I've been working with you for so long and you're going to make sure I get it, right? Okay, so that's where we start to run into some trouble with this dual agency. But in effect, that's what that is saying. Same thing with sellers. And I generally in my career have primarily attempted to focus on sellers more than anything else. But for those of you listing agents out there, and specifically for those of you listing agents that have a farm, this will become something that you'll need to deal with. So here I am, I'm farming my property and I list my house, or Dwayne lists his house with me. And it's the model, Sierra model that backs to the canyon, and it's $600,000. Sweetness. 3 days, or actually 2 months later, I still don't have Dwayne's house sold, but we're working on it. And the seller across the street or around the block calls me up and says, Lance, I have the Sierra model. I'd like you to come over and list my house. It's the exact same house that I already have listed for Dwayne. Okay. Can I list that house? Well, of course I can. Okay. Now I've got the same house, same neighborhood, same everything. Let's just, for argument's sake, say they're identical in every way. But now maybe the prices are different. You know, maybe I've got Dwayne's listed for 650, but my new seller wants to be a little more aggressive and he wants to do it for 625, or maybe, or vice versa. So these are the type of things, in addition to the more obvious ones we've already discussed, that the PRBS covers. And these things come up. I mean, the latter one that I just gave you, came up with me all the time when I was an active agent farming. Because then, of course, the next thing happens is the house that you listed 2 months after the first house sells first. And now you get to tell your seller, guess what? We have a new comp. Oh, really? Yeah, the house I listed, which is identical to yours, just sold. I'm like, what are you kidding? You just listed that 2 days ago. You've had my listed for 2 months. What's up? It happens. Okay. So this disclosure of representing multiple buyers or multiple sellers covers a little bit more than just that one item we were talking about. We've already had this discussion, so I'm gonna go a little bit faster here. This also discloses, again, in addition to the agency disclosure form, this is now talking about dual agency again, and talking about how that dual agency could apply to this particular buyer, and what that means. So we've kind of covered that. So unless that's not clear, I'm going to keep on pressing on. This is a relatively new, and again, I say relatively new, time flies. This has probably been out now for 10 years. It seems like it was a year ago, but this also can be very misunderstood. So what this talks about is offers are not necessarily confidential. All right. So what that means basically is you're telling the buyers and the sellers that depending upon the seller, the listing agent may or may not be authorized to disclose what the other offers are. So let's just use a quick example. I'm the listing agent and I've got 4 offers on the property. My best practice is to go to all 4 of those agents and say, I've got multiple offers, give me your highest and best offer, and, give it to me, in 2 days, or whatever it happens to be. When that agent says, hey, what are the other offers? It is just an easy, pat answer. I'm sorry, I don't disclose any of the offers, and you're just going to have to get me your highest and best. A lot of agents lose their mind. Oh, come on, just tell me. And this will happen in our own office, by the way. Oh, come on, Lance, it's me, And I'm like, I don't care who you are. I'm not going to lose my license or end up in some hot water and tell you information that the other party doesn't have. And because that's in effect what these agents are asking you to do, give them an edge, give them a one-up on this. So bottom line is, the best practice, in my opinion, is not to disclose. Now, some agents will say, well, wait a minute, you can disclose, and they'll point to this particular paragraph. And my response back to them is, well, I can, or in this, to use the language, I may, but I choose not to. Okay. So, and this is the deal with that. As long as you disclose none of the offers to none of the agents, you're fine. As soon as you decide to choose, hey, I'm going to tell Dwayne, but I'm not going to tell Drew, then that's where you get into trouble. Or if you do, and this is why I'd recommend do not tell any of the agents. Let's use my example. Let's suppose, well, let's go a little crazy, because this wasn't that crazy. I don't have 4 offers on the property. I have 12 offers on the property. Okay. Not unusual, right? And let's suppose my policy is I am going to disclose. I don't want to waste people's time. So I'm just going to tell everybody, hey, I've got offer at 450, at 475, at 460, blah, 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 blah. The challenge is you have to make sure everybody knows what every offer is, and frankly, what every detail of every offer is, not just the price, what's the financing? Are they asking for closing costs? And then as people start changing their offers, okay, well, thank you for telling me that, Lance. I'm going to send you over a new one and I'm going to raise my offer up 10 grand. Now I got to go back through and I got to tell those other 11 offers, oh, wait a minute. Offer number 4 is no longer 650. Offer number 4 is now 660. I'm telling you guys, you can't do that. And you're going to make a mistake. So best practice, just do not disclose any of the offers to any of the parties. And you are going to keep these offers confidential, okay? As opposed to what this paragraph says is that you may disclose them. So hopefully that's clear. Here's the signature page at the bottom of page 1 on the PRBS. Again, very straightforward. You'll notice that there are no landlord tenant options here. So you just have your buyer and seller executing it. Buyer's brokerage firm. So Andre, let's get back to your example earlier. So we've already ran into it. Okay. So here,
Yep.
well, here they're calling you the buyer's brokerage firm, whereas in another place on this form, they're going to call you the selling broker. Okay. The selling broker and the buyer's broker are the same thing. Okay, so we're going to run into that. And here's the first example of you're going to see some inconsistency in how they label the brokerage. So in this case, your buyers and sellers up here, the firm, if it's Coldwell Banker, it'd be Coldwell Banker Town and Country, the company's license number, date, you would sign here as the agent below your license number and date. And in this case, it's already pre-filled in because it has me down as the selling brokerage or the listing firm. Coldwell Banker Town and Country, DRE number, date. My name is auto-populated. I would sign and I would date. So you guys sign these, the brokerages don't sign, or the broker in this case does not sign the PRBS. Okay. Questions?
Yes, Lance, on that, not necessarily confidential. Have you ever seen a confidentiality agreement?
Not so much on residential properties. You'll see that on commercial stuff, or if you guys get letter of intents on maybe on a lease or something like that. Most everything on the commercial has some sort of NDA, non-disclosure agreement, or confidentiality agreement, where they're specifically saying you can't disclose this, can't talk about it, you can't do anything with it. I very rarely, I don't think I have one example where that was ever done on a residential transaction.
What about instructions of the seller to disclose? Is there anything that?
Well, this would be the deal. If I would have a long conversation with that seller and explain to them why that's the wrong decision. Now, if I was unable to, and I would in effect make the argument that I just made with you guys. And if the seller said, well, I don't care. I want you to disclose. Okay, fine. Then we're going to put it in the listing agreement. So in the listing agreement, we would put in there that the seller is authorizing Coldwell Banker Town and Country and Lance Martin to disclose all offers to all other agents during the negotiation process. And then I would just, oh my gosh, I would hate it. And quite honestly, this is the deal. If I only had 2 or 3 offers, it's no big deal. I think I can manage that. I can comfortably make sure that all of the 2 agents or the 3 agents are aware of what the offer is and any modifications or changes. But guys, I mean, it wasn't that long ago where, we've had listings, and many of you guys have, where we've had 50 offers. We've had 100 offers on one property. That is undoable. It's just undoable. So, but if they insist, put it in writing and then just be very, very careful.
Then if it happens after the listing agreement and addendum, would that be sufficient? If the seller says, hey, yeah, you have my instructions.
Correct. You definitely want to get it in writing that you have their 100%, that you have their permission and their authorization to disclose that.
In the form of an addendum to the listing agreement.
Well, I think you could put it in the listing agreement. I think we have enough room in the listing agreement itself to do that.
If it's after the fact, if it's after the listing agreement.
Correct. You could put it on an addendum. Correct.
Thank you, Lance.
At that point, Javier, so we're going to talk about this at a later date. Guys, I'm going to bring up a blank addendum. Okay. And we're going to talk about a blank addendum. And we're going to talk about when is it appropriate to use an addendum. And the reality is you can use an addendum on pretty much every single form in the library, not on the disclosures necessarily, although sometimes that's even appropriate. So nothing wrong with using an addendum. Even if you think you have some room, it's like, hey, I have room on the listing agreement to put it on, but you want to emphasize it, which by the way, there is no additional emphasis by putting it on an addendum. If it's in the contract, it's in the contract, but you may say, hey, I just want to make sure this kind of stands alone. Or in Javier's example, this is something that came up after the listing agreement was initially signed, and this was an afterthought. And the seller says, hey, I want to authorize you to disclose this. Absolutely, put it on an addendum. That's fine. Okay, so move on. I don't see anybody else unmuted. Let me check chat. I haven't looked at chat in a minute. Okay. Oh, Oh, you're welcome, Andre. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna do the wire fraud advisory. And again, we are pushing up on 1:23. So I think we'll probably hit our target to get out of here on time at 1:30. Okay, you guys, this is, if you've experienced this, if there's anything that's gonna send a chill up your spine in a real estate transaction, this is it, okay? You do never want to be in a situation where you're representing a buyer and all of a sudden their earnest money deposit gets misdirected and their money is gone, or their final funds to close gets misdirected. And I say misdirected, I'm being kind, is stolen. And then God forbid you played a small role in that because your email has been hacked, or you've been clicking on links that you're not supposed to be doing, or all the rest of that sort of stuff. This is terrifying stuff. So this form is exactly what it says. This is an advisory to the client that in effect says, be careful. Okay. There's a lot of hackers, a lot of scammers, a lot of criminals, a lot of bad actors out there. And we want to be extremely careful on how we handle that. The body of being careful is in effect the following things. Make sure you're getting phone numbers and account numbers only from the escrow officer. Do it over the telephone. Okay. So let's use they use property managers and landlords. Let's push those aside for a minute. So, I'm the buyer and I need to wire my funds into escrow, my closing funds, or maybe my earnest money deposit. Best practice is to have that buyer and that escrow officer talk to each other on the telephone. Okay. And say, this is my information. I'm not emailing my bank account number and my routing number to the escrow officer. I'm only contacting them via phone. If there's going to be any change made, which happens periodically at the beginning of the escrow, hey, I wanted to go to this account. And then at the end of the escrow, I want to do a different account. So all of that stuff should be done and verified. Again, only using phone number. Do not ever wire electronic transfer funds prior to calling. So again, you're telling the buyer in my example, hey, you're going to wire your closing funds in. This is Summer's phone number. I want you to call Summer. I want you to verify with Summer. This is the bank account routing number and information for Orange Coast Title. Okay. Don't do it via email. And the gist of this is one of us have clicked on a bad email, somebody has hacked us, somebody's looking, they know we're in the business and they see that we're emailing to escrow or to a buyer that says, hey, getting ready to close escrow on Friday. Well, the bad guys monitor that stuff. They see that there's an escrow going to close, they kind of intercept it, and then they send the email over to your client pretending to be the escrow officer. And the reason they got to do that is because you had a breach in your security, or escrow had a breach in their security, which is why the basic rule on this is never tell your buyers to email any of that information. It all needs to be done over the telephone. Okay. And again, orally confirm the seller's instructions. By the way, this also applies to seller's proceeds. Escrow just closed. The seller has $500,000. Seller wants that money wired to their account. That all needs to be done, double checked, triple checked, and should not be done in the form of emails or text messages. We do it all the time, guys. Don't do it. You're just asking for so much trouble. And of course, it talks about Wi-Fi security there as well. A little bit of information here on, and if you're referring your clients to the FBI, man, I got to tell you, God bless you. Good luck with that. So there's a little bit more information here on what they could do and some safeguarding, that sort of stuff. So, and again, the last note on this one above the signature block is there are existing alternatives to electronic wire fund transfer, such as cashier's checks. Okay. So in effect, what we're telling our clients, which is so funny because we used to take personal checks. And then we said, no, let's not get a personal check. Everybody needs to get a cashier's check. And then we said, well, geez, cashier's checks are nice, but gosh, wiring is so convenient. And now we've actually kind of taken a step backwards for a lot of clients and said, nope, we're going to go back to a cashier's check. We know we walk into the bank, we get the cashier's check, we know it's secure. So depending upon your level of comfort, your client or your client's level of comfort, you're going to be potentially recommending they get a cashier's check. One thing that we considered at Cobalt Escrow, which we actually haven't done, but it's still always on the table, record. Why is my recording stop? That was weird. That was odd. Anyway, so I timed that almost perfectly. So I'll take a couple, just so you know where we're going next week. We will actually start with the residential listing agreement. We're gonna make it through the rest of the forms on the RLA. We more than likely will have more than enough time to not only finish the residential listing agreement, but then jump into a couple other forms. So I'll pause for just a minute, see if you guys, anybody have any questions, comments? Do you like this format? Is this user friendly?
Really like it. Thank you, Lance.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we will send you a survey. Hopefully it'll be today. If not, it'll be tomorrow. Give you a couple things. Gonna make a couple little tweaks that hopefully you guys will like between now and next Thursday. And we'll go from there. Otherwise, we'll see you next Thursday at 12 o'clock and have a great day. Go sell something. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Nice.